Deep in the ocean, a crew discovers a beautiful stowaway within their submarine. With war ongoing, they assume that she's a spy, only to learn that she's something far more dangerous. The USS Titan detects missiles heading their way, so the crew hurry to take their vehicle deeper to avoid contact. However, Lieutenant Lawrence hears a disembodied voice, telling her to shoot them all instead. This makes her hesitate and miss their mark, so Captain Banks yells at her to deploy their torpedoes as a countermeasure. Lawrence launches the weapons, which detonate the enemy weapons far from them. Chief Watts reprimands Lawrence for hesitating and tells Ensign Nunez to check if she's fit for duty. Bradford then confirms that they're still outside Russian borders, so the enemy just fired at them within international waters. Knowing that they're vulnerable, Banks tells his crew to send their submarine deeper to avoid detection. Later, in the torpedo room, Marsh hears a singing voice. Meanwhile, at the medbay, Lawrence shares her concern about the ongoing conflict with Russia, and Nunez hopes that the government can avoid World War III. Thinking of home, Lawrence wonders if her companion has someone to return to. Hesitantly, Nunez mentions a boyfriend, though their relationship isn't stable. Elsewhere, Commander Simpkins listens to the singing voice from their radio when Watts summons him and Bradford to the bridge. There, Banks asks about the voice, but the two British men are still trying to identify it. Bradford then presents the video sent by Admiral Bressers, announcing that war is imminent. To avoid this, they plan to strike Russia's military leaders simultaneously, though the USS Titan and other submarines who'll deploy the attacks will have to get close to their target, making this mission risky. Watts sees that their assigned location is 5 miles from the Russian coast, putting them squarely within enemy waters and in range of 5 patrolling submarines. Simpkins corrects him that the Russians have 9 patrols and a jamming device that works within 5 miles. Since this information wasn't shared with them earlier, Banks gets frustrated that their British allies are keeping intel from them. Because of this, he later shares with Watts his suspicions that Bradford and Simpkins are withholding more information from them. With this, he asks his comrade to keep an eye on them. In the torpedo room, Marsh finally traces the voice to one of the pods, and to his surprise, he finds a woman inside. He immediately reports this to Watts and Banks. Given that they're 645 feet below sea level, she can't have snuck into the ship, and with them being in the water for 2 weeks, she couldn't have survived without anyone noticing her. Banks tries interrogating her, but she doesn't respond. Nunez soon arrives and covers the woman before taking her to the medbay. Banks then orders Marsh to check the other torpedoes to ensure that they still have their weapons. As they leave, Watts quietly asks their captain what they'll do with the woman. Banks hopes that their British members speak Russian to get information out of her. If not, they might need to use force. Meanwhile, Bradford receives alerts, so he wakes Simpkins to let him know that it has happened. Concerned, Simpkins asserts that they have no choice but to do the job. The commander later uses a radio to tell his allies to send the American briefings, particularly from Admiral Bressers, to convince his crew. Elsewhere, Rodriguez catches Bradford doing something to their machinery. He reminds him that they need a work order for any alterations, but Bradford dismisses his concerns. Rodriguez still presses him, so Bradford lets him take a look at what he's working on, only to ambush the man and snap his neck. Afterward, Bradford proceeds to damage some wires. At the medbay, Nunez gives the mysterious woman some food, but she only takes a cup of water. Bradford soon tells Simpkins about what he did, which makes their situation more delicate. Just then, Watts tells them to talk to the mysterious woman, whom they assume is Russian. Simpkins thinks that if she's Russian, it's better to lock her up. He also suggests that she might have swallowed a transmitter to announce their location to the enemy. Still, Watts orders them to find any information from her. After he leaves, Simpkins notes that the mysterious woman might be the distraction they need. However, Bradford worries that if she's not Russian, she might be something else. Nunez soon joins them, so Simpkins tells her to run a blood test on their stowaway. They can't really do tests there, but Simpkins wants the woman to think that they can, so she'll talk. At the bridge, Lawrence finds that their comms aren't working. Banks assumes that this is due to the jamming device that Simpkins mentioned. Not long after, the USS Titan detects a sub nearby. Simpkins identifies this as the same one that attacked them earlier, though he doubts they've spotted them yet. To strike first, Lawrence suggests waiting for the sub to pass so they can fire at it from behind, making it difficult for the enemy to return fire. As they wait for their chance, however, the singing voice echoes throughout the submarine. Watts thinks it might be a distraction from the enemy. However, the enemy sub suddenly fires a torpedo, but it's not aimed at them. This makes them wonder if they heard the singing too and got confused. The torpedo can still detect their heat signature and divert towards them, so the USS Titan fires their own weapon, detonating them from afar. After this, Bradford checks on the mysterious woman, not knowing that she's speaking to Nunez telepathically. She tells the medic that she doesn't need her lover, so she asks what Nunez wants from him. Suddenly, Nunez blurts out that she needs him to admit that he loves her. Bradford hears this, so Nunez awkwardly leaves. Alone, Bradford speaks to the woman in Russian, but she doesn't respond. Instead, she telepathically reveals that she knows he killed Rodriguez. This stuns Bradford, so he goes to Simpkins to report what happened. Before he could, however, Banks calls his comrade. Banks asks his opinion about the voice, which Simpkins insists might have come from the Russians. He claims that the Russians might be experimenting on underwater speakers to confuse the sonars, but Banks points out that the other sub also got confused by the music. The British men soon convene, and Bradford insists on reporting what happened with Rodriguez and the mysterious woman. Simpkins refuses, reminding him that if they're discovered, all of their sacrifices will be pointless. Sensing Bradford's guilt, Simpkins reminds him that, at least, they're not bombing cities and killing the innocent. Bradford thinks their crew might help them, though Simpkins argues that they'll report to the US military first and wait for orders. If they wait that long, Russia might nuke what their country has left. Nunez then arrives and tells Bradford that they've launched a buoy to try to send a broadcast to HQ. After Bradford leaves to work on this, Simpkins asks to speak to Nunez, telling her to relax around him while they're alone. She admits that it's not easy since he's distant towards her, and seems to be keeping something from her. With this, the man holds her hand and admits that he needs to tell her something. Just then, someone calls on Simpkins' radio, so he takes the call, not hearing Nunez confess her love for him before leaving. Later on, the sub's senior engineer learns about their beautiful stowaway from his companion. This makes him nervous, as he recalls where he's heard the singing voice before. Just then, the woman appears. She asks the older man if he remembers her, and the engineer prays in response. The submarine's propulsion soon stops working due to a power failure. Because of this, Banks decides to raise the submarine to the surface despite being in Russian waters to avoid being stranded there. Before they can activate the emergency blow, Watts announces that the entire engine crew is gone. Given that there are no other exits to the submarine, Banks orders Watts to check the torpedo room. He also tells Lawrence to bring their stowaway in, suspecting that she's involved. Now alone with the British officers, Banks asks them to do whatever it takes to make the woman talk. Bradford hesitates, but Simpkins agrees. He also hands Banks an emergency message that includes a new target. Banks notes that their emergency message system didn't alert him, so Simpkins suggests that it might be due to the power failure. With this, he plays a new video from Bressers, who announces that they're at war now, so Banks must fire their entire payload into their target. Meanwhile, Watts asks Marsh if anyone else has been in the torpedo room. Marsh says no, so the chief tells him to check the tubes before heading back to the bridge. At the bridge, Watts and Banks check their locked satellite phone to ensure the authenticity of their orders. However, Simpkins bumps into Watts to discreetly switch his device before he can hand it to their captain. Because of this, Banks sees a falsified message, convincing them that their orders are legit. Nunez then arrives with the stowaway, and Banks demands to know who she is. When she doesn't speak, Bradford pulls her away, but Nunez defends that the woman isn't in the military. Banks reveals that they're already at war, therefore they need to eliminate any threat. To everyone's surprise, the woman speaks, telling Banks that he doesn't belong here like she does. Convinced that she's hiding something, the captain orders Bradford to get information no matter what. Bradford cuffs the woman in another room and questions her about the missing crew. He tells her that things will be easier if she's honest, and she responds that he should also be honest. She then starts singing in the same mysterious voice they've been hearing. Quickly, Bradford turns on a radio to drown out her voice as he already knows what she is. However, when she touches his radio, it starts to malfunction, revealing that she's the cause of their power failures. With the radio down, the woman uses her voice to control him. Meanwhile, Banks and Simpkins assure Nunez that they merely want to scare the woman into revealing her identity. In case it doesn't work, they'll use medicine to get her talking. Simpkins then talks to Nunez discreetly. He asks about her family, and the woman hesitantly mentions that her mother and brothers are in Ohio. Simpkins is glad to hear this, but he doesn't share why. Elsewhere, Watts reviews the last video from the Admiral and tells Banks that Bressers seems different in it. Banks assumes that he's stressed about the war, so Watts tries to dismiss his concerns about it. He then reports that Marsh is manually fixing their power since their wires were fried. This surprises Banks since their mechanisms should have been more durable. Since their comms are still down, they wouldn't know if their orders were changed or rescinded. With this, Banks orders Watts to help in restoring their power. Soon, however, they hear Bradford scream. The men rush and find him strangling the stowaway. Marsh and Simpkins wrestle him off of her, but the man starts seizing, so they call Nunez to bring him to the medbay. Watts then interrogates the woman about what happened, but she doesn't explain. With this, he decides to detain her. That night, while Nunez is asleep, Simpkins slips in a photo of them together inside her Bible. Meanwhile, the mysterious woman is cuffed in the torpedo room while Marsh is working. She easily breaks her cuffs and seduces the man. As they kiss, however, he screams as the woman bites his mouth. Later, a sleeping Bradford hears the woman's voice, telling him to kill him. He immediately gets up and goes to the bridge where the others are trying to figure out where Marsh is. Bradford then tries to get to the launch control, so Simpkins blocks him. This leads to Simpkins being held hostage, so Watts and Lawrence aim guns at Bradford. Bradford reveals that they've been lying to them, and with the woman's voice telling him to kill his comrade, he's convinced that the truth will come out with Simpkins' death. Hearing this, Banks authorizes Watts to shoot the man dead. Banks then interrogates Simpkins, but he claims that he doesn't know what Bradford meant. Simpkins goes to Nunez for a checkup. During this, she mentions hearing music whenever she closes her eyes. Simpkins assumes that the woman is doing this since Bradford went mad after speaking to her. Nunez suspects that he knows more than he lets on, making her think that he doesn't trust her since their relationship is only casual. However, Simpkins notes everything he's learned about her, including the fact that she never reads her Bible. He confirms this since she hasn't seen the photo he snuck in there. Simpkins admits that he hasn't been able to say how he feels since he's worried that she won't return his feelings. To show him her trust, Nunez reveals that their stowaway hasn't slept in the 2 days she's been there. This gives Simpkins an idea, so he later pours something into a cup of water, then uses buds to cover his ears before meeting the woman. He gives her the cup, which she quickly downs before she starts singing. However, this doesn't work since Simpkins cannot hear her. He also confirms what she is since she drank the water. After Simpkins leaves, Watts and Banks interrogate the woman about the recent events. Instead, she tells them that Simpkins is lying to them about everything. This bothers Banks, so he soon checks Bradford's body and finds the real satellite phone he and Simpkins switched earlier. With this, he goes to Simpkins and knocks him out. Simpkins later finds himself cuffed with the remaining crew watching him. Under Banks's orders, Nunez hesitantly injects him with the medicine to get him to talk. This leads to Simpkins admitting that he cut their comms but argues that this is for their safety. He also insists that he didn't drain their power. Banks accuses him of delaying the launch, but Simpkins argues that he wants them to launch the torpedoes. The truth is that the US government and most of the east coast of America are gone. To prove this, he tells them how to deactivate the jammer that's messing with their comms. Watts deactivates the jammer, and they immediately receive several messages, confirming Simpkins' claims. Nunez figures that this is why he's been secretive around her and why he asked where her family was. The man reveals that what's left of the US military is in London, but this makes his country the next target. Since the USS Titan is the only boat in position to kill the Russian military while avoiding citizens, they have the only clean shot of saving his country. They kept this a secret since they knew that the crew wouldn't act immediately without their superiors. This is why they faked Bresser's video, given that the Admiral is already dead. Watts argues that there are other subs out there, but Simpkins reveals that everyone else was sunk. Despite this, Banks tells Watts to get someone on the line to confirm their target's location. Simpkins argues that making a call will reveal their position, but Banks refuses to believe him. Meanwhile, the bloodied woman screeches. Simpkins asserts that she's not with him, but her noise will lead the enemy to them. With this, Nunez offers to deal with the woman, pointing out that, so far, she's only been attacking men. However, Simpkins believes that the stowaway isn't human, as they discovered years ago that creatures like her lived in the ocean. Watts scoffs that he thinks the woman is a mermaid. So to prove this, Simpkins tells them to give her salt water, knowing that she will drink it without hesitation. Banks questions what the woman might want from them, and Nunez suggests that she wants to throw them off course, like what happened to sailors in the mermaid myths. Considering this, Banks orders the women to give their guest salt water. While the women head to the torpedo room, the men receive a message from Admiral James, who confirms everything Simpkins said. He also acknowledges that their 2 British members are working under orders that weren't shared with the US military. Despite the breach of trust, they're still working on the same goal, so he orders Banks to unload their weapons on their target. Meanwhile, the women confront the mermaid, who assures them that she won't harm them. Instead, she wants to free them from the men who will destroy the world. Nunez realizes that the mermaid wants to stop the nuclear attacks. The creature comments that men are fighting each other, but their weapons will destroy everyone else. Nunez argues that if they don't fight, there'll be nothing to save. However, the creature assures them that if they join their world in the ocean, the violence of men won't reach them. She then telepathically tells Lawrence to kill the men, and the woman struggles to resist her command. She ends up bleeding through her eyes, and soon, Lawrence heads for the bridge while the mermaid grabs Nunez. At the bridge, the men prepare to load the package and head to the surface, but Lawrence arrives and shoots Simpkins. Lawrence then orders the rest to cancel their launch. Banks defends that they're protecting everyone else, but the woman asserts that the world beneath the surface would be destroyed by their bombs. Meanwhile, Nunez pushes off the creature from her and runs to the bridge. However, Watts moves to push the button to launch the torpedoes, only for Lawrence's bullet to hit him first. She also fires at Banks. Seeing what she'd done breaks Lawrence from mind control, so she turns her gun on herself and shoots. Nunez arrives and finds the massacre. Before she can mourn Simpkins, Banks uses his last breath to tell her to push the button. The mermaid stops her, mocking her for doing what men tell her. However, Nunez argues that she's doing this for the men and women back home. Switching tactics, the mermaid offers to bring Simpkins back if she relents. She explains that time works differently for mermaids, allowing her to see the possible future where Nunez and Simpkins build a happy family together. Just then, James calls the ship, revealing that the Russians are about to attack. Despite her possible future with Simpkins, Nunez knows what's at stake, so she decides for the future of mankind.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.